to see me. Should I start?
Yes.
All right. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Last night I was with a group of Jewish people, and they gave me the topic. I was supposed to speak on sharing of interspiritual journey. Now, that's a typical thing if you're with Jewish people or Christian people. They want to know your personal spiritual journey. And sometimes it's even required. Like when you are on the path, let's say, to become a priest or a deacon in the Episcopal Church, which is my church, you're required to give your spiritual autobiographies. You may not do it in the same depth as you would with a guru or a spiritual director or something like that, but you have to do it. And I guess that's one of their ways of evaluating whether you're really serious about becoming a priest or whatever. So, but I'm not used to doing this with Vedantins. So Vedantins, I think Vedantins are more humble because you don't tell your own story. You tell the story of I met such a wonderful Swami and then tell about him, not about yourself. So this is experimental. You may think this is crazy, but we'll see what we can do. This is my interspiritual journey. Interfaith is actually very popular at this time in history, so that's why these other religions have asked for it. I've spoken many times to Christian groups and Jewish groups, and sometimes they're a mixture of different religions. What I can say is, first, I was born and raised in Santa Barbara, California, which some of you know. I was not raised in a religious family. My father was Swedish background, and they're usually Lutherans, but he didn't care anything about the Lutheran Church. Only he had an older sister and brother-in-law who were very devout Lutherans. So when they would come to visit us in Santa Barbara, we all trooped off to the Lutheran Church as though this is what we did every Sunday. My mother and grandmother, who also lived with us, were Holocaust survivors. So a Jewish background, though I didn't understand any of that when I was growing up, and maybe we'll get to that also, but that's been written about. It's been written about at least, whereas my finding of Vedanta and Christianity is not so much written about. When I was 16, I decided to organize some of my girlfriends and go to a different religious worship, a religious service every weekend. And being teenagers, we sought the most unusual ones we could find. We went to the Buddhist temple, which was all Japanese people, and went to their Sunday school and learned about Buddhism. We went to the Jewish Orthodox, and you know how the Jewish Orthodox have sort of a curtain dividing the men and the women. So the men, who all looked old to us and all had beards and were davening, on one side of the curtain. They was there, and us on the other side. I didn't see any other women, but there were about 5 of us giggling teenage girls. So I just can't imagine what all those bearded men thought of us. But that was one thing. Then we went to the Russian Orthodox and the Greek Orthodox, and we sat in silence with the Quakers. With the Quakers, we went to the Christian Science, the Black Muslims. We went to so many things, and this went on for maybe 3 months. And by then, most of my girlfriends were not interested in this adventure anymore, and they dropped off.
Were you accepted everywhere that you went?
Well, they let us in. That's all I could say. They let us in. I don't know what they thought of us, but it was usually just one visit, Anyway, finally, it was only my best friend, Suzanne, who was still at my side, and she and I went to the Vedanta temple. Now, neither of us knew anything about Vedanta. I was 16 and she was 17, so what would we know? But my father, who was always reading and studying, knew everything. At least I felt he knew everything. And so he told us about Vedanta. But then we went to the Vedanta temple, and it must have taken, I see some other people I know from Zooming. It must have taken 6 years before I was really engrossed in Vedanta. But the first thing that attracted me was that Vedanta teaches that all religions lead to the same goal. And I must have been a born interfaith person. What I did not like about Christianity, and of course, most of the people around were Christians, they said that Christianity was the only true religion. And some of them even said non-Christians were going to hell. Well, even as a 7-year-old child, I knew that couldn't make sense. You can't think in the abstract as a child, but you can think in concretely. And I knew that there were children on the other side of the world, which was China, I think. And I didn't know what religion they were in China, but I knew they weren't Christians. And I thought, all those children couldn't be going to hell. So that was my thought about Christianity. The other thing that was so attractive about Vedanta is that it seemed like people were not coming to the temple there in Santa Barbara just for social reasons or just because their family was there or something. They seemed to be genuine spiritual seekers. So I was very attracted, but it was not until 1975 that I was initiated by Swami Prabhavananda. And that was just the year before he died. So I didn't know him too long. Part of the problem was because we lived in Santa Barbara and he lived in Hollywood, we'd only see him once a month at the most. If I was there, I would see him. But sometimes I was also by then going to the Russian Orthodox Church. So I was pretty crazy. But finally, I got to know some of the people at the Vedanta temple. I got to know some of the nuns and some of the devotees. And Swami Chaitananda, I've always been very fond of him. I knew him from the moment he came to this country. He was so young. He was just like a little boy, so charming. So I knew some of the people there. And they said, well, these are some ways to get to more contact with Swami Prabhavananda. Well, one of the ways was to stay afterwards, after the Sunday lecture. And he would have a small group of people that he would meet with in a different building. So one day I went with this group of people, and we all stood in a circle. There were maybe not even as many people as in this room. We all stood in a circle, and he greeted each one. When he got to me, he didn't say anything. He just looked at me very intently with a kind of depth that I don't think I'd ever experienced. And I was totally overwhelmed. I thought, I have never met any man like this before. So then I became his disciple. And but then when he died, it was July 4th, 1976, was exactly 200 years after this country was born. And then I was, that was difficult. But by then, Swami Swahananda had come to take over the work. But also by then, I was very interested in monastic life, just absolutely passionate about getting involved in monastic life. And so I talked to Swami Swahananda, and he said, well, yes, that's a good thing. I recommend that you check out the San Francisco convent because I think you might like it. So he was right. I went to San Francisco, and oh my goodness, I was ready to join that, but I had one more year in Santa Barbara. And that one more year, I lived with Prasanna, Catherine Whitmarsh, who was working on the concordance to the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Now, Catherine Whitmarsh had known Swamiji as a very small child. So at Ridgely Manor, she was there. And so people were forever asking her, oh, Prasanna, give your reminiscences of Swamiji. Well, she was only about 3 years old. She could remember. But the one thing she could remember was that Swamiji had her and her brother chase each other for pennies. And that's what, a child would remember, I guess. That's why. Did you know that story? That's why he did that, I guess.
We heard that she sat on his lap.
Well, she may have. She probably did. Whether she remembered it, I don't know. But that's the one story she definitely remembered. So there she was in Santa Barbara working on this concordance. I don't know how many of you have seen it or read it. I still use it myself. The concordance to the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. That was before computers and all that. So she was writing out every word in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna other than conjunctions and prepositions. Every other word got indexed, and there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of index cards on a big, big circular desk. So that was her commitment to this great work, which she did complete. She and I became very close, good friends. And there was one thing, though, that we didn't agree on, and that was monastic life. She did not think the monastic life was that important. It wasn't necessary for me. I could live with her. She even told me, if you'll just live with me and forget about convent life, I will take care of you for the rest of your life. Well, Prasanna was a very wealthy woman, so she could have, but by then I knew the Santa Barbara convent, and I knew that it would be more of a challenge and conducive to spiritual life to be a nun. So I decided to be a nun, and fortunately they took me in San Francisco, and I was there for 15 years. As a San Francisco nun, I could go on and on about what we did there and so on, but we don't have a lot of time. But how I came to Christianity is another story. One of the things I did in San Francisco at the temple there was work as a musician. Now, I am not a very good musician. I'm very amateurish musician, but they needed whoever they could get. So I played instruments. I played the harmonium. I played the recorder. And most of all, I played the piano for offertories on Sunday. So since I played the piano, Swami Prabhavananda had his eye on me. That when the organist became too old, I would take over. So one day he said, I want you to study the organ. You can study all summer long, as though that would be enough, but you could study all summer long, and then I want you to take up as accompanying the choir, the women's choir, in the fall. Well, I didn't really want to study the organ, but I got a very good teacher, and it became very compelling. I loved the organ, and I loved the music, and I also loved learning about the way organs are constructed. So I went around to different churches in the neighborhood, but especially the Episcopal Church, which is the denomination that I was always attracted to anyway. As I went there, and there I learned, oh my goodness, all these years I've been missing this fantastic Western music that they are playing in the churches. Not only that, but the Episcopal Church is based, and the Anglican tradition is all based on the Book of Common Prayer, which is the basic, book of worship. It was originally written in English in 1549, so it's been English all along. Of course, it's been translated into many languages, but basically it's an English book, and beautiful English. Oh my gosh. So beautiful Western music and beautiful English. I had studied Sanskrit in the convent, Vedanta convent, because everybody studies it to a point, but I really went on. We were very slow. One of the other sisters and I, it took us 10 years to get through all the grammar. And then we became part of a little group of sisters who translated Vivekachudamani word for word, because Swami Prabhavananda was offered a class to the convent on the Vivekachudamani, so that it began each class with those few of us who had stuck to the Sanskrit to translate word by word. But now I would have forgotten everything if it weren't for the Monday night class, for which I'm very, very grateful. So that was that really brought me into the Christian church, but I was very confused for a year and a half or so, because it wasn't as though I gave up Vedanta. I believed everything Vedanta taught, and I don't know, I've never converted to anything. I just add religions, don't convert. So, but I thought, well, I don't know if I'm supposed to remain in the Vedanta convent, because I was still there. I was in the Vedanta convent, but I was going to church as well as the services at the Vedanta Society. So to remain here, or should I transfer to an Episcopal convent? I didn't know, but fortunately I had a number of very fine teachers, both Christians and Vedantins. One of my fine Christian teachers was Bishop William Swing, who was the Episcopal Bishop of the Diocese of California. California is actually, it doesn't mean the whole state. The dioceses go by the size and the population of a state. So, for instance, we're in Maryland, so we're in the Diocese of Maryland. Maryland is a small state, so there's one Diocese of Maryland and one Bishop of Maryland. In California, this being a large state, there were 5, but the Bishop of California is the one who's in charge of the San Francisco Bay Area. So somehow we became friends. I've had very, very good fortune in this life. So I became friends with this bishop and went to see him at Grace Cathedral often. And one day I was sitting with the bishop, and I said, I don't know if I'm supposed to be in the Vedanta convent or the Christian convent or what. He never told me. Nobody ever told me you should be this religion or that religion. But what he said was, Eleanor, it doesn't matter whether you're in a Vedanta convent and leaning towards Christianity, or you're in a Christian convent and leaning towards Vedanta. Because in either case, you will have to be a bridge person. And in this world of strife, we need all the bridge people we can get. So that's how I was first commissioned to do interfaith work, which I am doing the best to do I can to this very day. It's one of my major ministries. Yes.
Did he know about Vedanta?
He knew some. In fact, he was one of the speakers at Olema Memorial Day, and he was one of the favorite speakers that they had, actually. But he was very inclined toward interfaith work himself. He started an organization called United Religions, which is based on the United Nations model. United Religions has grown around the world. They're what they called circles of people. There have to be 10 people in each circle, and they have to belong to at least 3 different religions in that circle.
What's his name?
William Swing. He's still alive. He's very elderly now, though. But he started this United Religions, which is still going. In fact, I thought at one point, I was maybe about 10 years ago, I thought, well, I should really join one of these circles. And so I looked up online and saw, well, where are the nearest circles to me that I could get to? The nearest one was in New York City at the UN. So I became part of the UN circle. And what we did, we had special things we did every year on September 21st is the Peace, International Day of Peace or prayer. And we did programs for that every year. It was a different bunch of people that did it. We had this wonderful ritual of, we took the flags of all the nations of the United Nations, and we processed with the flag. And when we got to the front, we would say, blessings on Nigeria, or whatever was the flag we were holding, until we had gone through all the flags of the United Nations. And peace to Nigeria, peace to the United States, peace to every country that belongs to the UN. And then we had another thing I did was I served as a sort of a tour guide to the United Nations with young people of different religions. So that was a very nice ministry. I'm not doing that one anymore, but I'm doing under other interfaith work. So that was Bishop Swing. He was very gifted in pointing out what different people, could be doing with their lives. So I'm very grateful to him. I also consulted with Swami Sarvagatananda because he was the most senior Swami at the time. Swami Aseshananda had died. Swami Aseshananda, by the way, was my brahmacharya guru. So, and I had been very, very, have a lot of respect for him, but he was gone by then. So that was all the things that I was able to do as a, interfaith after I took up Christianity as well as.
So when
as
you left
Vedanta.
the convent, where did you go?
So when I left the Vedanta convent, I went to, well, first I had to kind of look around. I didn't know anything about Episcopal convents, but I ended up where I am now, which is the community of St. John Baptist, which is in Mendham, New Jersey. And unfortunately for me, most Episcopal convents are in the eastern part of the country, so there was no way I could do it without having to travel a distance. And I certainly, one of the most painful moments of my life, it was days and months, was having to leave the Vedanta convent in order to take up the Episcopal path. The Episcopal path, I think I didn't say what is most compelling about it is communion. Now, not everybody needs to receive communion, and not even Christians need to receive communion. It depends on their denomination. But I think of communion as a rehearsal for the day when we actually will experience union with God. So every time we do that, and now as a priest, I get to preside over that too. So it's my little rehearsal, which I've done many, many times and maybe haven't made much progress, but it's a wonderful thing. So I think that's maybe I should stop for a moment in case there's more questions and
Tell
comments.
us a little about the Holocaust background.
I will. Yeah, that's my third part.
Oh, that's the third part.
My third part is how I embrace Judaism.
Okay.
3 religions we have to do.
Okay.
I have a
Yes.
question. Now, this Vedanta and Christianity, what do you see they converge?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the
Where
last
they
one.
converge.
Where they converge? Because ultimately it's human. It's a person God created, right? Human created.
Mhm.
So they have to converge somewhere because all are God's child.
That's
Where do
right.
they converge?
The conversion, as I understand it, not just with Vedanta and Christianity, but also other major
What do you mean?
religions, is what Brother Steindl Rast called the mystical core of organized religion. If you go to the depth of any of these religions, it's mysticism, it's actual knowing of God. And the great exemplars of all these religions have known God. So now when we do, now I'm involved in all these interfaith programs. One of the things we do, I have a rabbi friend, a woman, and also a Muslim friend. We do programs together, either in person or online. And we talk about topics like compassion or charity or prayer. And when these are done, we say, we're all teaching, all these religions are teaching the same thing. So yes, there's a fantastic convergence, but you have to go deep. Otherwise, yes, the differences of languages and customs and all of that, which is relatively superficial. That's at least my opinion. Anything else that you would like to comment or?
I have another question actually.
Sure.
Sorry. I always, when I think about this, this heaven, concept of heaven, because we, in our Hindu religion also, what I find it very troubling that, if I go to a place and I have every day is good thing, then, good has no value without that. And I'll get very bored. Every day I have, it's like every day Christmas, right?
Well, maybe
So
you're
just
a
what-
devotee of Mother Kali or the death and resurrection of Christ. Religions also look at both the good and the bad and say we must embrace the whole thing. But our ultimate goal, what Jesus called the kingdom of heaven, and Vedantins call realizing God, that is all. That's in a different sphere, isn't it? So yes, it is all good. You could say it's all good.
Did you encounter any challenges in monastic life?
Are there any challenges? Oh, there's lots of challenges in monastic life. One of the ways we put it is, see, we have 11 in our convent. So it's like being married to 10 other men that you didn't choose. So, and we have in the Vedanta convent, we used to talk about grades of sandpaper. That I would say, well, I'm, grade D sandpaper because I'm so difficult to live with or whatever, No, it's very challenging. And that's what people I think they don't understand. And probably the same thing here. They say, oh, they have wonderful food. They have, a beautiful place to live. What's the austerity here? The austerity is you have to live with your brothers or your sisters.
That makes us feel better.
So, yes, that's a great challenge is simply living with other people that you didn't choose. They're not at all necessarily compatible personalities. And You know, in my community, I'm the only one who's doing interfaith work. I'm the only one who's a priest. And they could say the same thing about themselves. They all have, you know, their specialties, and others may not understand that at all. So sometimes you have to go outside, you know, outside the convent for people who will really understand what you're doing. Does Swami, would you want to say something?
What elements of Vedanta have you been able to integrate into your daily spiritual practice?
Oh, I still meditate, or try to meditate every day as my daily spirit. I try to see other people as God. Well, Christians try to do that too. Yeah. Try to see the divinity in all people. What is there different, really? You do worship with a lot of the same elements. You know, we also have candles and food and flowers and incense and all of that. So we learn to do worship. It's a different style, but it's worship of the great divinity that we all respect and believe in. So whether else is specifically Vedantic? Well, Vedanta is behind all the work I'm doing in interfaith. And I will tell people, not just Vedantins, but others, if it were not for Vedanta, I could not be doing this work. Because Vedanta taught me not only are all religions paths to the same goal, but all religions, at their depth, we're living in the presence of God as Vedantins or Christians or whatever.
But maybe in that respect, Episcopalians attracted you because of their broad-mindedness.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. See, one thing, I had to make a decision, but it was a very easy decision. If I join a Christian group, which one should it be? Well, first of all, it has to be one that has monasticism, because that has been the absolute constant in my life from the time I was very young to the present time. I may not be a good example of a nun, but it has been always a very strong passion for me. So I had to choose a denomination that has nuns. Well, there's not much to choose from. Episcopalians, Catholics, but if you choose Catholic, well, that's not very easy for women, at least if we are a liberal-minded women. So, and at that time, when I first joined the convent, I wasn't thinking about becoming a priest myself. But the very fact that women could not be priests in the Catholic Church was just intolerable to me. So I would not think of becoming a Catholic. Therefore, there was no choice. Most of them don't even have monastics. So that was, yeah.
This kingdom of heaven, as you say, is it really, we can compare that to Brahman, the way Vedanta is? Or you think you find ultimate realization is really where you experience kingdom of heaven?
The kingdom of heaven would be compared to knowing God, I would say, or samadhi in Vedanta. It's not really a place, and it's not really a time. It's a condition in which you are entirely united with God, or Brahman, if you're looking at it more from an Advaitin point of view. Yeah, Jesus talked about the kingdom of God a lot. And he would compare it to very ordinary things like, spinning or mustard seeds or whatever, But yeah, the kingdom of God is samadhi. When you're in samadhi, you're in the kingdom of God, I think. So maybe I should go to the Jewish aspect because we only have an hour, I think, and then see. So I am, as far as I'm concerned, equally a Vedantin, a Christian, and a Jew, all of them. But the Jewish one is the most recent because I didn't know I was Jewish. I didn't even know my mother was Jewish, although my mother was a Holocaust survivor. And her mother, our grandmother, was also a Holocaust survivor. And she lived with us, but they never talked about the Holocaust. They certainly never talked about being Jewish. I don't think my mother ever practiced Judaism at all. But ethnically, she was Jewish. So that's why she was a Holocaust survivor. We grew up not really knowing anything about this. We would only get hints, my sisters and I. One of the hints I had was I had a friend named Ruth Zitron, obviously a Jewish girl. And one day, Ruth told me, you can read about all this, by the way, in the story, and it's in the book upstairs. One day, Ruth said to me, your grandmother is Jewish. And I thought, hell, what is that? Where did she get that idea? So I went and asked my mother, is grandma Jewish? And my mother said, no. Now, I don't know whether she was just lying or what she meant was grandma wasn't a practicing Jew.
How old were you when this happened?
Probably about 8 or 10.
And how old was your mom when at the time of Holocaust?
18. She was in Auschwitz and Brennan, which is a work camp, and Bergen-Belsen is where she ended up. So, yeah, but 18. Of course, nowadays you can still meet Holocaust survivors, but usually they were in a camp when they were children, or even they were just born in a displaced person camp. But this was, earlier. My mother died in 2015. So she had been 18 when she was sent to the camp. But so we had these little hints like that. And apparently, this is just what my sisters and I have 2 younger sisters, what we guessed was that our parents didn't want us to suffer from anti-Semitism. So this was not to be known, although in Santa Barbara, we never experienced anti-Semitism of anybody, but that's what they do. Now, this is all to just summarize some of these things, but you can read it. There was a mostly unspoken idea in my home that Germans are bad people. So my sisters and I, see, now I'm having to go to Swami to get German translation, but we never studied German in school. We never went to Germany. Everything about Germany was out in our lives. So that was certainly a very strong hint that there was a problem there in our background. But it was not until maybe I was a teenager that I even learned that we fought against Germany in World War II. I wasn't a very good history student, but they didn't tell us anything about the Holocaust in those days. You didn't hear that either. So now they do. But so we never heard about the Holocaust. But when we grew to be young adults, my sisters and I had different, let's say, approaches to this. My younger sister, who's still alive and lives in Atlanta, Georgia, she and I felt that we should respect our mother's silence about the Holocaust. We knew by then the Holocaust existed, and we may even knew that she was in it, but we didn't know it was because she was Jewish, and we didn't really know much. But we wanted to honor her reluctance to talk about it. So we did not try to urge her to say, well, what happened during the war and all that? We didn't do that. However, our middle sister, Bonnie, was a student of psychology, and she became actually a psychotherapist later on. But she felt it would be bad for us if Mom did not talk and we did not find out. We would not have a sense of our own identity and all of that. So she, in a sense, made our mother talk about it, and she wrote it down and told the other two sisters later on. We never heard directly from Mother, except some very, very small hints here and there. I mentioned here that Bonnie did, when she was in college, she drew a genogram, which is something like a family tree. It's in a different form, but where you can see every member of your family back several generations and what happened to them. And my mother's side of the genogram, everybody had died except for my mother and grandmother. So it was all just black X's on that side of the genogram. So we never met any of these relatives they were Hungarians. So that was a great shock to me to see what had happened. And I have to say I owe that sister for teaching me. But seeing that all these relatives had died in the Holocaust, that still did not tell me that they were Jewish necessarily. So how do you know whether somebody is Jewish? So I've spent many hours of meditation trying to understand what a Jewish. Now I think it's pretty simple, and you can even take a DNA test, and they'll tell you you're Jewish. But I didn't know what makes a Jew a Jew. Well, there were a few more hints. If you can remember the year 1993, there was a movie called Schindler's List. Well, I saw that movie, and my father saw that movie, and it really struck me, especially because they show Hungarians going by, being checked out by the Nazis, and I thought, that was our mother. Going back, going through the line naked and being examined by the Nazis, and horrible. And I was just aghast, and I started to cry right there in the movie theater, saying that was my mother. Now, a few weeks later, I was on a walk with Mom and Dad in a San Francisco street, and we passed a theater where Schindler's List was showing. And it said in the marquee in big letters, the way they do, Schindler's List. So there I was with my mother and father. And my father said to me, "Did you see that movie?" And I said, "Oh, yes, it was a very good movie. Did you see it?" "Yes, it was a very good movie." And my mother was standing there angry. She said, "I didn't have to see that movie. I lived it." So that was an obvious hint that she really had been in these camps. But by then I was a young adult. So let me see.
That's all she was willing to say? Or?
Yeah, she said, "I lived it." But I got more information from my younger sister, who actually, talked to her and wrote down information. But then, I began to read books and articles about and talk with friends about the Holocaust and learn more about Judaism. And I saw in my family tree, there were some obviously Jewish names in my background, like Goldbahn. That was my grandmother's maiden name, Goldbahn. So, but some of my friends tried to tell me I was Jewish because they knew, in a sense, more or accepted more than I did. And I thought, that was so fun. I'm so tall and blonde. I was a blonde then. I don't look like the way Jews are supposed to look. But, then I joined the Vedanta convent and all of that.
But how did your friends find out before you did?
Well, because they're studying, they're studying the Holocaust and, and Judaism. And, even my friend, when I was only 8 years old, my friend who was Jewish knew that my mother was Jewish and my grandmother.
Oh, did they have tattoos on their arms?
No, they didn't. My mother and grandmother did not, because it was the 1944 by the time they were, they were.
Hungary was late in that.
Yeah, Hungary was the last country actually to be overrun. So and in a way that was fortunate, because they had only a year before the liberation, and it was a better chance to actually come out of it alive. But now we can know anyway. The most recent thing I did was go for DNA testing. There's ancestry.com and all that. So I applied I got it as a gift, actually. I've done a lot of speaking, and one of this talks was to an organization called the Holocaust and Human Rights Education Center. Physically, it's in Westchester, New York, but a lot of its work is on Zoom and all of that. But they asked me to do my story, so I did my story. Now, my story did not include all about Vedanta and Swami Prabhavananda and all that. My story was more like the Jewish part. So I did that, and as a gift, they gave me a DNA testing kit. Because I'm a nun, I don't easily come by money to buy a DNA testing kit. So they bought one for me, and I had to wait for weeks, and it came out that I am 50% Ashkenazi Jew, 45% Swedish, which makes a whole lot of sense. And then the other 5% is a little bit vague, Norwegian or something like that. But that's exactly what I should be, according to my parents. But it's very nice that you can, even in a scientific way like that, find out your ancestry. Whereas many Jewish people are 98, 99% Jewish. So I did that, and let's see, what else should you know? My mother received reparations from the German government. In the last years of her life, she had a housekeeper. When she was on hospice, she had round-the-clock nurses' aides to take care of her, all that from Germany. Now, she had applied for reparation from Hungary, too, because that's her country, but they didn't give anything. Well, some years ago, it was 2017, one of my sisters and I went to the Jewish Cultural Center in San Francisco, because that's the place where they'd been giving reparation money to Holocaust survivors who lived in San Francisco, where my mother was. And so we learned a lot more information. One thing we learned were that the Hungarians were the worst. They were very pro-Nazi. They didn't give reparation money to anybody. So we lived that. But the funny thing too was my sister and I were just leaving this Jewish Cultural Center, and there was a man named Brian Brown who had been my mother's kind of a social worker who had overseen the end of her life and the reparations and all of that. And he said to me as I was going out the door, "This is the first time I've met a Jewish nun." Well, it's actually not. I mean, there's other, we know some other Jewish nuns. I know some Christian ones at Vedanta, and yeah. So
One was beatified not long ago. They were
E-
the same sacred. She was, I think, Jewish and
Edith
survived-
Stein.
maybe survived the Holocaust and then became converted to Christianity, became a nun. It was a
Yeah,
little
Edith Stein, I
controversial.
think. Yeah,
Yeah, maybe.
yeah. Well,
So how were you raised?
I wasn't raised anything. I was raised secular, you can say. I mean, the highest values in my family were the arts. We went to concerts and art museums and all that sort of thing. But although I have to say both of my parents were highly ethical people. But you can imagine what my mother thought, having survived the Holocaust. A lot of Holocaust survivors are atheists, actually.
Well, I'm not surprised.
She was not an atheist, but she was mostly Unitarian. She was interested in issues of justice, but she always said she did not believe in ritual, which was funny. I used to tease her, actually, because I would go with her to the Unitarian Church, and so I would say, "Now, what is that? Those people are lighting candles. What is that for?" She just didn't answer. but everybody has ritual. So
So did you have a Christmas tree because everybody else had a Christmas tree, or you did not have it?
I had-
Christmas tree. Did you have a Christmas tree growing up?
Oh yeah, we had a Christmas tree. Yeah, we did have a Christmas tree, and it was Christmas morning that we celebrated, and we were like every other child. We wanted Christmas presents, so we were waiting for that. My younger sister, the one who did the Genogram and has since actually died of cancer, she would spend hours sitting underneath the tree, shaking the presents and smelling them and feeling them. And by the time Christmas came, she knew what was in all her presents. I told that story at her memorial service about her as a child, because I had known her longer than any other person who was present.
So you would have known, like what you know right now, the genome test, like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Like mom passed away 2015. So let's say you knew that in 2000.
Yeah.
Would you talk to your mom about or you still try to keep that as a secret?
I don't know, because I'd have to feel out the situation then. But I never did talk to her about it. I did get information from my sister. But then, more recently, I've gotten so much more information. One thing is, I belong to a group of 2Gs, or second generation Holocaust survivors. We met at Drew University, which is actually where I got my MDiv to be a priest. But they also have a program, of Holocaust program. It's called the Drew Holocaust / Genocide Center. And you can look it up online and find these books we've written and all that. But they have, one of the things they've done is had workshops for Holocaust survivors. The first one was actual first generation Holocaust survivors. Then those people got too old, and so they've had 2 workshops for second generation Holocaust survivors. And we were the most recent. We were in 2019. So in the fall of 2019, we got together. We had 2 very fine professors. One was an expert in Holocaust studies, which you can get degrees in Holocaust studies now at Drew. They have such a strong program. And the other one was a retired English professor. So we had to write and speak, and oh, our English got corrected. So we had these two professors to edit. So we spoke, and we shared what we had written each time. 6 times we met, and we had some assignment to write and speak. So we shared with the other students in the class. There were 11 of us total. And then finally, we decided we would compile a book, which is, you can see upstairs if you haven't already seen it. And these people were Drew was so generous. The people, I think they just donated their time as professors, and then they became the editors of the book. And then they published it. Drew published it, and they also distributed, they also had it printed, and they distributed it. And so so much work Drew has done to make this possible. Now, the first printing, it's about the last copy of the first printing that I put upstairs, because they've been all sold out. But there's going to be a second printing that will come out in the fall. And, we will see what happens with that. But so that's all how I've learned. And then, of course, the other thing is the Holocaust Museum. The last time I was here in the Vedanta Center, I spent one day, went to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. Of course, it's a short trip. So I went there and I asked about my mother. And they came with reams of paper about my mother. It was just amazing. But some of it they gave to me right away, and some of it came as email link. This is links that they sent by email, and then they dissolved the links after a certain amount of time. So you can get it, but it won't go everywhere. So they have the Holocaust. If you have not, well, you have to have a relative who either died in or survived the Holocaust to get to the Family Research Center. But even just going to the Holocaust Museum is a very, very great education. So I went there and I learned about my mother. And then this trip, thanks to the Vedanta Society, I'm here again. And I went to learn about my grandfather. I had not known anything about my grandfather other than his name and his birth date, because he died in the Holocaust, but obviously I never met him. We never heard about him. We didn't know anything. So I went to the Holocaust, the research center just the other day, and learned some things about my grandfather. So
why was all this so important to you?
My grandfather was so important?
No, all this, your Jewish background.
Oh, the Jewish background was very important, because I didn't know who I was. I mean, Jewish is, it's not just a religion that you can take up or drop or whatever. It's an ethnicity. So it's in your blood. And I got to know many Jewish people. I have many Jewish friends. And it's very important. Just like, even though it's not maybe in your blood, being a Vedantin is very important.
Yeah.
It's who you are. Well, it's also who I am, but not so knowledgeable about Vedanta.
No,
but
what I'm thinking is, if I've been a spiritual seeker,
Mhm.
why would these things be so important?
Oh, you mean your family background and all that? Well, it is to some people. It's not necessarily to others. I was never interested in my family background, especially not as a Vedantin. I thought I was a nun and I shouldn't be interested in that anyway. But now, yes, Jewish background is part of who you are, I think. Whether you are practicing or not practicing, which is why I lost all those relatives. It wasn't like Hitler was checking out which one is practicing Judaism. He couldn't care less. He only cared about the ethnicity. So the ethnicity of the Jewish people has been enormously important. And now it's our job as a second generation Holocaust survivors. We've been told it's your job to talk about the Holocaust and how it has influenced life, even to the second and third generation, because otherwise there could be another Holocaust. Well, there could be anyway.
Two questions.
Yeah.
So your first part of this speech. So you had Vedantic, you had the option to be Vedantic and lean towards Christianity or be a Christian, lean towards the Vedantic. So what tipped you over?
Communion.
What is communion?
Communion is a spiritual practice, a type of worship that's done in some Christian denominations, especially Catholic, Episcopal, the more Catholic. And communion is, as I said, it's kind of a rehearsal for oneness with Christ or oneness with God, whatever you want to say. Now, people talk about you receive physically, at the physical level, you're receiving bread and wine. And traditionally, or if you're at all conservative, this can only be done by Christians. Mm-hmm. Myself, as a priest, if I have a Hindu that comes forward or a Jew that comes forward, I'm delighted to give them communion. Because what does God care? What does Jesus care?
What? Second question is like, as Vedanta says, and you told before, seeing God in people.
Yeah.
So how you, like, after knowing your background and all the Holocaust details, how do you see a German who might be pro-Nazi or somebody? Because there's so many around us, we know.
Yeah, I'm much less of a problem now than I had. One thing that happened, one of my ministries, as we call it, spiritual direction, and people come and we talk about God and spiritual practice and all that. Some of the people that come to me are really more spiritual than I am. There's no question. One of them was a German woman who's a pastor. She's a Lutheran pastor. Unfortunately for me, she's gone back to Germany. But while she was living in New Jersey, she came to me once a month and we talked about spiritual life. And she was an extraordinary, spiritually, both in prayer and in the kind of service that she did for poor people and Hispanics, especially. She had a service in her Lutheran church that was English and Spanish, both. She had to give both services, but she was just such a fine person. And I've started to be able to say, well, yeah, Hitler was Hitler. That was his problem. It doesn't mean that all Germans are like that. There are still Nazis, though, and we have to be on the lookout for extreme right-wing groups like that.
So, have you studied Judaism also?
Oh yes, I had my rabbi friend, whom I do some programs with. We started out our first year. She was my tutor. Mostly, the pandemic had just started. We became friends before the pandemic, but when the pandemic started and I was seriously trying to study Judaism, we would have a telephone conversation every week. And we would go through the Siddur, which is the Jewish prayer book. And because I'm, even now, not this last Friday, but almost every Friday night, I go to a Shabbat service online and her Shabbat service. So she went through the Shabbat service with me piece by piece by piece. You know, there's certain traditional pieces. And I learned some of the chant, and also Shefa Gold, who's the first rabbi that I really got to know, who has programs at our retreat house. She specializes in Hebrew chant. So I've got to attend her services there. And then I've read books, of course. But it's just a very small amount of what there is to learn, of course. I mean, the Jewish people are very erudite, many of them. I have not studied the Talmud or Mishnah or any of those things.
When you were talking about oneness with God, communism, what do you call it?
Communion.
Communion. So isn't that somewhat similar in Vedanta as well? Oneness.
Well, Vedanta don't have that particular ritual, but there can be other ways of practicing a union with God, certainly. I mean, meditation.
That's what you're-
In fact, when I first was drawn to Judaism, the Vedanta people in San Francisco said, well, why don't you just read the Bible and meditate on Jesus? So, I mean, some said that. And I said, but that's not communion. That's not the same thing. So I could still meditate on, I still using the same mantra I've always had from Vedanta and meditating on Sri Ramakrishna and Mother and Swamiji. But it's not the same practice. And that which does not mean that communion is better than some other practice. It's just different. It's a special practice that is appealing to some people.
It's like saying, yeah, you can give up worship rituals and do the japa.
Yeah. Well, japa is probably my most common spiritual practice. It's so simple. You can do it anytime, anywhere. So I probably do japa more than anything else. Although in the convent, we have 5 offices. There are offices per day that we do. And they consist of, they're always a psalm, a hymn, and some scripture reading, usually. So I'm doing that, and then the daily Eucharist. So there's a lot, but still, japa is more readily available. You don't have to have a group of people or anything. So you're all very fortunate to have that spiritual practice. Is there any other questions or comments?
I have a funny story about communion. I went with one of our close friends to a Catholic church during Lent time. They had some nice talks there. So I didn't know, row after row, you come for the communion, people start walking, and I also, sure enough, went, for communion. So our friend, he came running from behind, and he's telling me to come out of the line. I didn't understand why he was doing that. I kept going, and the person who was doing communion is looking at me that, what is this confusion? But they didn't let me take the bread and the wine.
They didn't let you have it.
No.
Well, Catholics, yeah. If it were an Episcopal church, they probably would have given it to you because we're much more loose.
In Notre Dame, in Paris, there was a line and I took the bread.
Well, we have a Catholic church in Mendham that I have occasionally went there for some particular service. But then I went there to a funeral because we had one of our women who works for us, her son died. And of course, out of respect to her, I wanted to go to the funeral. So I got in the line and came forward as I was dressed like this. I came in the line, and this young Polish priest looked at me and he said, "Are you Catholic?" And I said, I tried to cheat a little. I said, "Well, I'm Anglo-Catholic," which I am. I'm Anglo-Catholic. And he said, "I can't give you communion." He said that in front of everybody. And the funny thing, I mean, not funny, but it's kind of ironic, is that there was another line. There were two communion lines, and the other one, the priest was a Monsignor. He's a, senior, very distinguished priest. And if I had been in his line, I'm almost sure he would have given me communion. Another thing is, if I had not been dressed like this, but just in secular clothes, how will they know the difference?
Yeah, I got it like that.
That's how you got in communion.
So basically, you can give communion also, right?
Pardon?
You give communion also, right?
I give communion because I'm
I
a
think
priest.
you should have given him some communion, and that would have been solved.
Yeah, I don't, yeah. But unfortunately, I was not the one conducting the worship. And in a Catholic church, I would certainly not be allowed to have anything to do with that. So,
Interesting story, sister.
No, but is that a personal thing? Somebody can give communion and somebody else.
according to the rules of the church, the Catholics especially, you're not supposed to be giving communion to anybody unless they're a baptized Christian.
And practicing. And so I know in some churches, unless you go to confession, you can't take communion.
Well, yeah, that may be too.
We also had that unless you have the Gayatri Mantra, you're not able, you can't worship the family deity, even in homes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Is it written in Bible or somewhere, or just with a process?
Not the Bible. It's just a custom
For the
of the church. Now, in the Episcopal Church, the legal requirement is still communion is only for baptized Christians. But in fact, because we are so liberal, I myself would never restrict giving communion like that. If the person comes forward, why not give them? Jesus would certainly give them communion. Jesus, he had a reputation for eating with outcasts and sinners and all that. He would never be restrictive like that.
Sister, baptized, what does it mean?
To be baptized, that's the ritual by which people become Christian. It's with water, and it's a ceremony.
Baby, right?
It depends on the denomination, but many people are baptized as infants. Yes.
And what is the water where from?
The water is just water, but the priest consecrates that water. And I do that even if not baptizing someone, but we have something called renewal of the baptismal vows. So people agree that they will treat all people with respect and all the things you're supposed to do as part of their baptismal renewal. So that water then becomes holy water. And we keep it, some people like to put holy water maybe on their forehead or something like that.
The Christians who try to put boundaries and say you have to be baptized to receive communion and that Jesus is the only way to God, they speak to many parts of the Bible where they quote from. And the most famous you might know is John 3:16.
For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son.
And so my question to you is, what could I say? Because my background is Christian Catholic. And my family and friends are wondering what I'm doing.
Oh, you come to the Vedanta temple regularly?
It's my second visit.
Oh, this is just your second visit.
But I do a lot of online.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
presentations,
yeah.
so-
For Christians, he says that, you know, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. For a Christian, a Christian devotee, that may be true. For the rest of us, it's not true. But the whole thing with the Gospel of John is so difficult. For one thing, the Gospel of John is very anti-Semitic, especially in the Passion narrative. And the parts of the Bible that people quote that sound very exclusive usually come from John's Gospel. But the thing is, who wrote John's Gospel?
It was the old, right?
Pardon?
The last testament, right?
It's in the New Testament, but scholars don't believe that it was even written by anybody named John. In fact, it's something you can say is made up, which does not mean it's not valuable, because in John's Gospel, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, the life, I am the vine, I am the good shepherd. All these things, if you're a Christian devotee, that's very useful material. But we've been using, it's been one of the hardest ministries. For the last 2 years, my rabbi friend and I have co-led a class which is for half Christians and half Jews, half men, half women, half lay, half ordained. So it's very wonderfully diverse. But the Jews are so incensed by John's Gospel and the anti-Jewish. Now, and the Christians, somebody, I didn't know there was any problem. So we've had some rather emotional interchanges online.
In some place, Vivekananda, it's a slightly different way of understanding Christ's words. A human mind has no way of understanding God except through an incarnation.
Yes. Yeah. And if you study the Bible, the New Testament, what in the New Testament is nobody knows, but is believed to come directly from Jesus. The Sermon on the Mount, which I think Vedantins also study, and the parables. Everything else, it says even like miracles, we don't really know, but does it really matter? If you've studied, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. What else do you need to know? That's the real Jesus speaking. Or Sri Ramakrishna could have said the same thing. I know we've gone over
That is
times.
very interesting.
Anyway, God bless all of you, devotees of Sri Ramakrishna Ma and Swamiji.
And keep up the good work that you're doing.
I'm trying.
It's very important. Yeah.
I'm trying. It's very, very interesting work.
Okay, thank you.
Oh,
sister.
do you want to look at my oh,
So close it.
oh dear, there's going to be on the, I hope nobody sees.